8760 today in our series of topics that we feel like need some discussion, fractional CMOs. With me here today is James Dowd, Chief Creative Officer, Steve McLaughlin, VP of Strategy and Impact. Did I get it right this time?
Close enough.
Fuck. One day.
It's a dumb title.
So we were kind of thinking of like, what do we talk about in these? And we wanted to, not make it some boring old subject matter topic, but what we're seeing in the marketplace and the idea of contract roles, or the buzzword now is fractional, right? But we can point to certain sort of elements that made them rise in prominence, certainly coming out of COVID, and certainly some of the cost savings that they afford. Maybe the influx of talent in the market also created more shingles that needed to get their airtime. But what first comes to mind for you guys?
I think a big factor to add to your intro there is whether working with, supporting, acting as, whatever form it may be. We had this conversation prior to what sets up this one is there's a big, what the fuck is a fractional CMO question that is not easily answered, right? I think that's
fair.
To the point.
Yeah.
Because we've seen it in different ways, the expectation between a board, a C-suite, as to the role of the fractional CMO, it's varied and it's changed. And I think that's part of the problem is you can't hire it, you can't use it, and you cannot support it if you're not clear what it even is. So it's a new role that we are actively engaging with every single day that no one has clarity on, from their boss to us and beyond. And so it's a problematic shift or emergence in this industry is a role that no one's quite understood.
Yeah, and we're dealing with in two levels. We're actually, our clients are fractional CMOs acting on behalf of a client, right? So they're like the middleman to a client. But we're also being asked to play that role for clients. And I know, BJ, the other day we drew it up on the board, right, to answer the question, what the fuck is this? What is a fractional CMO
I
doing?
said, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
It's hard for me to get those out sometimes when we're on live camera, right? But, the two paths, right? There's the top one that was the strategic side of things, like how are we going to grow our business in 1, 3, and 5 years? What are the markets we're going to go into? Like the true strategic thinking side of things. And then there's the bottom piece, which I jokingly said this, a handful of years ago about like, that's really the tactical strategies, which doesn't really make any sense when you say it. But that's the reality of like, people are still thinking at the tactical level, but you still have to be strategic at that level. Like, how am I going to get more MQLs this month? Or what, just like, what is the audience I should be going after that we're not penetrating? Like, those are like pretty tactical, but at the same time, it's ultimately going to get them to that higher level strategy piece.
Well, it feels like the middle layer is always missing, right? Because if I translate it, it's I want senior thinking and experience to guide me or my team, but I don't want to pay for it full time. So I'll hire someone fractionally. They'll come in, make some recommendations, and they'll be the silver bullet. And I think from a small to medium-sized business standpoint or from an owner standpoint, a lot of times there's just the assumption that fractional is going to get it done. They're like the tactics will just execute themselves, right? And we know that that's not the case. But I think we see oftentimes that someone in that role is either, let's say, experienced out of execution, right? Or doesn't want to execute anymore, so they go fractional leadership role. And there's still this gap in either translating what needs to get done day to day, or even understanding exactly how to manage expectations on the leadership side, because there's not a true understanding of what goes into the work or what it should cost or the time that it should take to implement. So that's where I think when we were talking about it, an agency makes a lot of sense to play that role, right? Because you have the portfolio of subject matter expertise that can be throttled as necessary. And, ideally, great account planning is like fractional CMOing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, because it was honestly surprising when multiple brands, businesses came to us to act as fractional CMOs for them, right? Never heard of that before in this industry. But are there times where it makes absolute sense, especially as we develop more our consultancy capability? Yeah, we're right there, see the table, making informed decisions. When tactics need to be executed on, we have the staff right here to do it. But then for me, it raised another question of, like, what is the actual fractional CMO's role and responsibility? And it becomes far muddier when it's agency, because in like some of these scenarios where, like, if it's not me sitting in that chair, but if it's me sitting in that chair, I'm firing us, right? And the answer is why? Is because, like, if I'm going to do that role, I'm going to be a little bit more, strategic with how I spend the money, right? And so, but they're not asking for me to worry about their budget. They're asking me to execute on their budget, right? And so it's two different mindsets, which is still confusing for me to be as fractional CMO. Is, do you want me to go and offshore that to Romania, or do you want me to use my team that's here and trusted, and why, right? And they don't want to answer that question. They want me to figure it out. But I think that's this new area we're trying to figure out as we do it, is where is our responsibility to?
Well, that's where it actually is almost, you have to set your expectations in business up for, like, okay, this is the way in which I'm going to structure my team, or this strategic business unit, right? And, like, it's not something that can ebb and flow or go back and forth. Like, early stage companies trying to scale, they don't want to sink a ton of funds or of their seed money into C-suite roles. Okay, great. Like, have someone that can come in, play that fractional guidance to get some trajectory. But then if you're going to scale, when you have a team, that's where there's misalignment, right? Like, cultures, the fractional leadership can't really train, can't mentor, isn't familiar with the day-to-day and all the ins and outs of how you're running your business or how your teams are.
And is often chasing short-term wins that might not have long-term value.
Right. Well, that's a whole different thing, right? Because it's kind of like, most of the time, especially at that kind of, in a CMO standpoint, you mentioned it. Yes, you have to execute day to day, but you're also thinking about, okay, we are trying to grow into and become this type of company or this type of brand. What are the stages to get there? And you're constantly looking. It's like, a sports GM, where, like, you got to give them a couple of years so that the team becomes theirs and they can start to execute their plan. Trust the process, right? But as a fractional, that may always be sort of the ask, but then that it's,
right,
what have you done this month?
Yep.
Right? How many leads? How many followers? How many likes? How many purchases?
James, you said something before just about why it makes sense for agencies to do it, because we've got the resources to kind of spread it out, right? Well, that's actually, I've seen many definitions of fractional CMO too. There are some that are like, oh, we just need a part-time CMO. We only need somebody for 20 hours a week, which feels ridiculous too, because it's like, how do you quantify what 20 hours is going to get you over the course of a week? But the other piece of it is, there's certain skill sets, right? You might be a branding expert, you might be a lead gen expert. And it's just like, and a lot of times you find that, like, people are not great at everything. They're, like, really good at some things and not good at others. And so they're, like, piecing it together. Like, well, I'll get my lead gen CMO, fractional CMO over here. I'll get my brand fractional CMO over here, and kind of create what they think is, the ultimate CMO by combining different resources.
Have you seen any brands actively hire multiple fractional CMOs at the same time?
Not yet. I've read about it, but I haven't seen it actually in practice yet. But I'm like, oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Right. It's another way to look at it.
Or, the multiple fractional roles, like, that don't overlap, right? Because it's like, who's got other commitments, and then it's a complete train wreck. I think, kind of where I lost the momentum of the thought, but, where I was going was, like,
Sorry about that.
No, but if you get in the mindset that this is the way that I'm going to approach and structure my team, I think it makes sense. That where we've seen it succeed or fail is when there are multiple people that are either carryovers from a prior leader at a company that we're working with, and they've been doing sales and marketing effort, and now there's a third party that comes in and is sort of trying to get them all to follow a different playbook, right? And that's where you have different measures of success, different comp models, a whole bunch of things that truly don't, align. So I think if you're ever going to go and be like, okay, we're going to take this out or take this back inside, that's where the fractional model doesn't necessarily work, because you're not doing anything to train, your internal team. If at some point you're just going to hire that role and know that you're always going to go agency, or you're going to build that slowly, then that could make some sense. But I think a lot of times it's just trying to be efficient with dollars in the short term and not really thinking about how that all plays out in the long term.
Yep.
So maybe it's, I've actually, the other stat I saw too, I don't remember the exact number, but
Are you making up a stat right now?
no, well, I'm not going to make the stat up, but the concept of it actually is valid, is that the tenure of the average CMO has continued to go down year over year over year.
Yeah.
Right. And I think some of that is because it's like, okay, what's the value of the CMO? Right? Is it because they're not driving the short-term value, or because we're not actually getting to that longer-term goal, or there's just a mismatch into what the CFO and the CEO want versus how the CMO is going to get there?
Well, it's how the world has shifted. We've talked about this in other scenarios, right? But the role of the CMO, you go back decades, and it was to build a brand that people remembered, right? Like to build lasting connections, to build character, personality, emotion. That shit's gone. Outside of a few major brands that really only compete for lions, and they are immune to ROAS for different reasons, right? Everything else has gone data, right?
Yeah.
Attribution, tracking. So the value that companies place on building a brand has diminished.
Yeah.
So the role of the CMO, it's a less respected role in many ways, at the board table, or among the C-suite, because of this shift in everything going to lowest dollar customer acquisition, highest click-through rate, highest conversion rate, and not worrying about the broader halo of what actually building a long-standing company is all about.
You see there's CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer, and the Chief Growth Officer. Like, I think there's
Chief Experience Officer.
Right. But so they're evolving what used to just be the Chief Marketing Officer's role into like, oh, are they sales? Are they business development? Are they both? Are they about the experience? Are they? So it's just interesting to see the evolution of the C name as it related to the CMO is changing into other things now too.
Yeah.
But the fractional piece, I mean, we've all seen it, right? It's like consultants come in. It's fractional folks are single consultants, and I think when we were prepping for this, forget who it was, someone was basically like, oh, well, fractional just means that you got laid off and you wanted to not have a gap in your resume. I don't know if that's true. I think that there are folks that can thrive as in that kind of role, because they actually learn and take with them their different experiences.
Yeah.
That seems like a little bit more of a, lumping everyone in together, a few bad apples, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'll say
It was probably me who said it, by the way.
No, I don't think it was.
I mentioned that we're working with some now, and it's like, I mean, honestly, I think the relationship that we have with that individual right now is actually working really well, because she's able to get into the nitty gritty of their daily lives and just kind of pull away, like, okay, here's what matters and what's important, right? And she becomes that filter to the client. So that relationship, I think, is working really well. I'm not saying that we couldn't do that also, but it just, I think in her case, she's got multiple clients that she's providing almost the same service for. So it's like she's created a formula, and now she's got 4 or 5 clients she's doing it for. It's like, that seems like a winning formula to me, and it's probably pretty easy because you're just stamping it out across different clients. That feels to me not what you just described, which is like, oh, she had a gap in her resume. It's like, oh no, she has a skill that can be useful across a lot of different companies.
I think that's like where people that maintain great networks on the agency side, right, or on the talent side, can thrive.
Yeah.
Someone, it's not me. It's like, you have great relationships. You've kept in touch with everyone you've ever worked with, it feels like. And every time we're like, we need someone that can do this, you're like, I got 5. I got, or, that's where you can continuously fill the need for any type of work that you're recommending, right, as essentially the leader or strategist, right? Then I think that makes sense. And continue to build relationships. You trust your network, and you get great execution. But if you don't, if you're essentially going out to RFP every time you need, someone to support you on the execution side, that's where I feel like it's a short-lived role.
That's why BJ keeps me around, because I talk to people, and so he doesn't have to.
Listen, it's a struggle. It's a role I have to play.
You're a good family man. I don't have a family, so it's easy for me to go to happy hours and events every day. Yeah.
Well, we'll see I don't know if they would say the same, but I try. But I think when you were talking about some of the situations we've seen, it is key, it feels like, to define roles and also success. And we say that all the time, like, what does success mean? But when there's this independent party at play that's held to different expectations, that's where it's really clear, or really needed, it feels like, to have everyone understand what everyone's being held to and where that measure is. We've talked about it with different comp models tied to lead quality, right? And if one is incentivized to get volume and the other is incentivized to get quality, then you have competing interests, right?
Right.
With two teams that are, in theory, working toward the same goal. Yeah. So, or roughly the same goal. But how do we think that really plays out? The honesty and transparency thing isn't really our world.
Well, I think the scenario you're giving too, it's just like, oh, we can game the system to make your lead score go up. That's easy, but that defeats the purpose, right? Great, your lead scores went up. You have more MQLs because the system says it did, because they acted in a certain way, but it didn't get you any closer to a sale. Yeah, I'd rather go for quality versus quantity, and gaming the system.
No, I think a lot of people would, but where maybe it's just we've been in this for a while and now we're all cynical, but it feels like part of the way to get the most out of your agency or your marketing team or your sales team is, right, to always move the goal line. And so, or push them in different ways and kind of always keep a little bit of, the truth to yourself, right? And it feels like we're always trying to uncover, what's the real motivation, or what is a real quality lead, or what's the ideal type of client, or, okay, you said you didn't get any leads, but we saw we see the volume, we see the form submits, so you're saying none of them, they were all, it feels like that's just part of it, right? There's always like that, you did great, now do better. Right, and if everyone's being held to that, internal and external, it feels like that's a tough part to get alignment on, to get sort of a true team mindset.
Yeah, I feel like this might just turn into ranting about the industry, but CMOs, part of that role was to have a vision around the brand and where it could go and how it could connect, how it build stories, and then now they've largely shifted from I have a vision, I'm excited, to but show me the numbers tomorrow. And because that's the expectation from a board, especially when we deal with, publicly traded, or when we're dealing with startups, and it's that needing to see the value because they don't have absolute, piles of money to use. And we as an industry then respond and such, and that we focus on short-term wins. And then what do they have to do in 6 months to a year? They have to go somewhere else because they're not getting long-term wins. But we're just stuck in this vicious spiral of always focusing on tomorrow instead of next year. And the effort is there. The effort's not there. The branding is not there, meaning the residual feeling, the residual impact, the residual, connectivity. And so we sacrifice the future for today constantly in this industry, constantly.
Are there positives in the independent nature of it, though?
In the role of,
Like,
yeah, because it's the I have nothing to lose mentality. But are the people in those roles those types, right? Are they the ones who can say to a CEO, yeah, I know you need these numbers in a month, but I'm not going to get them for you because that's not going to be the best for you. And if you don't like it, that's fine. I'm only here for a few hours anyways. I can go to my other gigs. Or the type of people in those roles, the ones who got laid off from their CMO jobs because they wouldn't make any decisions.
well, most of the time they're not performance-based relationships, right? It's just a fee per month. I was talking more so there's no emotional allegiance to anyone on the team, right? Like, are they getting a more unbiased assessment of what the company's doing or the talent on the team? Because they're coming in third party, like, yeah, okay, maybe the culture isn't there, but there's nothing clouding their judgment either.
Yeah, I think so. And an example, just going back to the example I was talking about before too, it's just like it's the first time that I've heard someone on what I'll call the client side say these words. I don't care if nobody shows up for the webinar, as long as they signed up for it, that's a win. Because now we have their contact information. That's a lead. That's they raised their hand and expressed interest in the topic we had. That is now the sales team's job to go and close that deal. Right? Whether they showed up for the webinar or not didn't matter. But it's like, yeah, okay, I'll take that all day long because they took the action we wanted them. They're in our database. Now it's up to like the longer term plays. Like, how do you nurture that lead? Great, they didn't see the webinar. Who cares?
So we feel like they actually have the ability to make an impact? Or is it just filling a role for keeping a seat warm?
I think the people that hire fractional CMOs don't know if they need one yet or not, right? So it's an experimentation. And I also think that they still tend to focus on the short-term wins because that's what matters. They're like, we don't know how to figure this out. Somebody's got to figure this out for us.
Both in terms of metrics that they return back or spending that they go out with, meaning...
Well, it's both, right?
Yeah,
it's like, okay.
Yeah. That's what I meant when I said both.
I thought it was a question. I thought you were asking me a question.
No, but it's, if you put handcuffs on someone and say, go, and it's going to be a limited return,
right?
Ultimately. And so I think the fractional CMO role is they're setting them up to fail, always, right? Here's a little bit. Let's see what you can do, right? No, you only came back with a little bit. You suck, apparently, right? So I was right in not hiring you. It's like, that's foolishness from the start.
Well, or is it the hiring process? Like, is it outside of, the bigger enterprise, recruiter-driven, or executive search consultant-driven placements, for the most part, usually it's a relationship that existed from probably a prior life, right? Or there's a friendship there, or someone internally recommended this person and they worked with them, or so does that create some of that inherent issue with success? Are you brought in by someone as a consultant or as a fractional CMO? You're like, oh wow, the person that brought me in is actually the issue, and then you're kind of tiptoeing around, right? Or you're a friend of the owner,
Yeah, all I hear is cronyism, right? Someone who comes in to do what I say when I say it, because they're like me and they have a relationship with me, and so I can effectively run this without any sense of threat or challenge in that they're going to try to do their own thing. And then therefore...
Yeah, it's just a really expensive, executive assistant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what should they hire? What should be the hiring criteria? Vetting process.
For fractional, or are you asking the question of is fractional even, should that even continue as a practice?
I think it's always going to continue, right? It's just a matter.
Yeah,
Of,
I mean, I think I'm idealistic in this industry that it can return to great things and be influenced by culture, but also influence culture and be entertainment and education and be a lot of things for a lot of people. But right now it's not. And we stay in this world and we blame everything on the outside of it, but we're repeating patterns that take out humanity, that take out connectivity, that take out anything that makes someone want to be engaged with marketing and advertising. And I see fractional CMOs as maintaining the status quo in that space.
which space are you talking to, though?
I mean, in the industry in general, right? The lack of growth, the lack of value, they only nurture it,
B2B, B2C?
all of it.
Yeah.
That's actually a good question. Is whether or not, is it more common in B2B than B2C or the other way around? I see it more in B2B than B2C, but that's just been what I've experienced.
I think there because it's even more exaggerated, the value on
Yeah, leads, right? You can quantify it so much easier than
especially
brand.
like sales-driven organizations
Yeah.
that are realizing that they need to market themselves.
Yeah.
Right, it's not handshake anymore. It's not business cards at BNI groups and whatever else. Like
Yeah.
it is still driven by thought leadership and reach and all those broader metrics that you still have to continue to focus on. But they don't want to see it or understand. They don't understand it and they don't want to invest in it yet. So that's definitely like I'm going to dip my toe in the water.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I do think that fractional CMO is the new name for marketing consultant, which is what you used to see.
Mm-hmm.
It's just renamed. I like it. It's okay.
Yeah, but it's still just dipping your toe in the water, and then you go, well, why didn't I make a real splash when I dipped my toe?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And CRO and CGO, right?
Yeah.
Revenue officer, they've been around forever too. They're just outside biz dev,
Yeah,
right? It's just bring me a lead, I'll give you a referrals fee. But no one wants to wear the biz dev title anymore because it's so, kind of poo-pooed upon. So give me a fancy title, and then I'm not a sales guy anymore. Now I'm a growth officer. I don't know, maybe that's my cynical. I don't know.
What do you think, Tim? Do we leave anything out?
No, you guys are good.
Yeah?
Were you paying attention?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Talk some shit, give some names, go ahead. You got people in mind.
Hey, get a little drama, a little gossip. We can cut it out, but get going.
I don't know if I have any names that are true fractionals. Actually, I do. It's bad to name names.
Just trying to get you in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was all like most of the time, at least from prior life, they weren't fractional CMOs, but they were certainly fractional biz dev, and that like try to play account. They held relationships out there that they didn't have anymore, and whatever else.
Yeah. And I've seen fractional CMOs they don't know anything about marketing whatsoever. And they were there for connections. It was business development. That's it. It was
That's the problem. I mean, that's
give me your
Yeah.
list, connect the dots, set up these meetings. Let's find partnerships and collaborations, and ultimately it was business development, but fractional CMO title.
or they don't have the marketing is creative, right? Like at some point that died, but they come in and they're not thinking of ways to creatively grow the brand. And that doesn't necessarily always mean images, right? Like it can be creative ways to engage the customer, new ways, innovative ways, taking on or testing trends, and a bunch of different, things fall under that category. but it's not. And like when fractional comes in, it's like tried and true. What's, just get the basics done, get the metrics there. They're not thinking about how they can push the envelope because they want that safe paycheck, and they want to push toward. It's just further narrowing down the marketplace that we've been talking about for what seems like ever now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that becomes more challenging in the B2B space because if you're the fractional CMO for a business-to-business company, you're measured on like how many leads, how many sales do we generate, right? Because it's B2B.
Mm-hmm.
And forgetting all about the awareness thing, right? Because there's something to say about like when people are like, oh, I've heard of you guys, right? Well, that doesn't happen by doing lead gen campaigns. That happens by doing real marketing.
So theirs are,
Yeah.
leads, but consumer brands are sales, right? They're
Yeah.
still on the same
Sure.
metric,
Right.
but you don't sell Coca-Cola by just throwing buy one, get ones at people.
Right.
Like, you need to create the brand.
You need to create, right.
So I don't have any names really.
No, we're not listening to Scott's advice of starting drama.
There's so many.
Is it dangerous to bring in a fractional CMO and then say they stay here for a couple of months and then they go to like maybe a rival agency or someone else and, they have an inside scoop on what we do here?
So, question from off camera from our producer asking if it's dangerous to hire a fractional CMO if they are coming, if you let the wolf inside and they gather all your information and then they go to a competitor with it.
Yeah. Oh, you want more than that?
Yeah. I mean, that's a problem anywhere. That's a problem with any employee, and you have some, legalities to protect you in terms of, IP and the using of information. But the reality is yes, people take stuff.
I also think that's the exact reason why you hire a fractional CMO. They have an expertise in a certain
That
area.
you're pulling from, that they've now,
Right. Yeah.
they're not sitting behind a desk somewhere just doing the same brand, solving the same problems for years and years. Is they're bouncing around. They're finding new things. They're finding new ways of new processes, new technologies. They just solved that problem for someone else last month. So now you get that solution too.
Yeah.
But it's true though. I mean, that goes to, are you giving them enough context so that they can actually be successful? Because in the back of your mind, you're worried, or that it's temporary.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting expertise in this industry. There are competitors. It's always a possibility, and that goes to sort of a longer term approach. Is it sort of a test engagement, and if this starts to get some momentum, then it becomes a full-time role, and they're putting a team in place, or is it truly just pump it and go, and now you have knowledge transfer issues with your team or who's there afterward? You're worried about the confidentiality, you're worried about them, and so they don't get the full picture.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're the fractional CMO, you want that relationship to last forever, right? But yeah, what's the reality of that?
Ideally.
No idea. Yeah.
I got
Good question though, Tim.
duct tape goo or gaffer goo on my legs.
No.
You guys are approaching 40 minutes.
Yeah, I think
Alright.
we're good.
Just wanna do some closing statements.
Well, one thing, said my hand stuck from gaffer tape. One thing, another challenge I've seen faced by fractional CMOs is when they move to a part of the marketing ecosystem that they're not prepared for. I've seen this a few times where, say it's a startup and they don't have the money or the trust necessarily to bring in an actual CMO or build out the marketing team just yet, and they bring in someone off their resume from a big shop. So major brand, right? And then you go to a startup environment. I've seen a complete inability to actually do the day-to-day work. And then I've seen the other where someone comes from, startup they were with all these years, they helped build this brand and it got acquired, then they go to a major brand and they don't know how to work inside a true corporate ecosystem. And so they fail to communicate and collaborate inside that. I've seen it go both ways where they basically make themselves ineffective.
I think that's the biggest challenge is that in order to get the fractional anything, but CMO for sure, you need to most often really have been around. Owners are looking for experience. Experience translates to years in many ways, and the way our entire marketplace shifts daily, most of the time they're not keeping up with the day-to-day and the execution and what that means. So, now they came from a big brand, they have a big resume, or they've, worked on a bunch of different things, and they're charged with launching a new product or growing a brand quickly, and they don't really understand what it is to invest in digital infrastructure, or how to leverage technology the best way, or how to, or understand, or even what the investment is for great content, right? And it should be easy. Just get your iPhone out and just shoot, right? Like, we know it doesn't, but there's 3 influencers out there that do it that way. So the world thinks that, like, oh, content's easy. Just shoot everything and then just post it. Or, technology's easy. Isn't there just Wix and Squarespace? Just throw it up, right? Like, everything is pushed to just get it done. And they forget that, like, when they were in it and they were saying, like, why doesn't anyone understand that this takes time? Why doesn't anyone understand what goes into the work? They find themselves in that place where now all of a sudden they don't understand it. They're just pushing. And then, when we're dealing with it, it's tough because we see that they have the ear of ownership, and we're trying to educate along the way. And how often do we see that, like, they're not able to communicate it on our behalf? Like, it's not even selling it in, but they're not able to explain to key decision makers why things are different than they expect, or why things are, taking a certain period of time. And then they get, then the relationship becomes contentious, because until we have that, everyone in the room, let's talk it through, and this is where, there are miscommunication gaps. It's a challenge, right? Trying to continue to translate through that intermediary, which is a lot of times what they are for the bigger companies that we've worked with. So what's our final judgment?
Well, I mean, I stand by that. I think fractional CMOs, regardless of the fact that we act as fractional CMOs and we work with fractional CMOs, I still think it's detrimental to the industry. And I am idealistic that we can return to a more creative world of marketing, advertising, and content, and technology and storytelling that inspires people and engages people, excites people, entertains people, educates people, and we're not something they just despise.
Yeah, and I think, as you just said, that it's like, oh, sure, you're right. A fractional CMO is kind of minimizing the CMO role in some ways. It's like, oh, you only need some of it. You don't need all in. You just need to dabble in it because that's all that's needed. But I agree, James.
All right.
It's minimized.
I got one convert.
I mean, I think a slightly different, maybe more optimistic stance on it. I think for many businesses that think of it as staff augmentation, right? We've all been through procurement and know that that's an approach in many ways. But if involved ownership can truly communicate with this role and trust that role to drive and execute, then I think an agency, small, medium-sized, large agency, before it gets too bloated, right, can play that role really well because it has all of those resources at its fingertips, right? And we have, and this isn't a plug for us necessarily, but like it is a way that it can work. But again, you have strategists, you have planners that can look long term, and then the day-to-day, the ongoing work can all be done efficiently and not have to sign on multiple vendors or bring in multiple folks because, like I said, all that talent is there. But
yeah.
ownership has to be involved, right? Like, and it has to be able to make decisions quickly and put in enough of the time with that role to feel as though there's this continued sync, and if their vision shifts, their priority shifts, that's communicated so that, you know, things can be adjusted in real time on the other side. And I think that approach can be successful. I don't think that it can be looked at as like a bridge, or, you know, how can I just save some time or save some cost right now. I think it is a purposeful choice, but you're still investing, right? You still invest, maybe not in the CMO role, but now you have funds to go toward execution as well, right? So I think it can work, but it's not the silver bullet. It's not the, oh, I don't know how to grow my business and I'm really busy, so I'm just going to hire a fractional whatever and have them handle it for me.
All right.
Well, good.
Take us home.
Hopefully there's some value, you
Yeah.
know, some exciting conversation. I don't know. We'll try and do better next time, I guess. Say that every time. But gents, thank you. Another one of 8760 in the books.